And from a cross-curricular standpoint, since we know that literacy helps us function in every discipline, it makes sense that whether you are actually teaching literacy or not, that you are also considering what is your impact on a student's literacy.
Hello there, my name is Monica Burns, and welcome to today's episode of the Easy EdTech podcast. It is 2024, and whether you're joining for the first time, 100th time, or for the 200th time, I am so glad you're here. I have lots of exciting things in store for you this year. Each episode of the Easy EdTech podcast is designed to give you ideas you can try yourself, share with a colleague, or bookmark for later in the school year. Get ready for stories from my time in the classroom, the work I do now with schools and districts, and my travels to different EdTech events, as well as practical ideas and inspiring stories from new guests each month. If we mention something you'd like to check out, you'll find the link to it in the show notes. So don't forget to head to my website, classtechtips.com/podcast, for all of the show notes and resources from today's episode. This episode is sponsored by my new mini course, Learn ChatGPT this summer, which is now available to all members of my AI and Education membership. Join today and stay for 1 month, the whole school year, or however long you like. You'll get instant access to my mini course, Learn ChatGPT this summer, with 6 short videos. It's built into my AI and Education membership, so you'll get all the member perks too, like a new video update each month and plenty more to explore. Go to my website, classtechtips.com/AI, to find the link to the membership. That's classtechtips.com/AI for all of the details. This week's episode is titled EdTech's Role in the Science of Reading with Linda Rhyne. I came across a blog post that Linda wrote for ASCD this spring. As an ASCD author and faculty member, I am often poking around and looking to see what kind of resources are shared on their channels. And I reached out to her to see if she would join for an episode of the podcast. The science of reading is a big topic of conversation, and I wanted to unpack the term with her and talk about the technology connections to a science of reading implementation or initiative that might take place in a school or district. So Linda shared lots of great resources and ideas. I'm excited for you to hear this conversation. Let's dive in. Welcome to the podcast, Linda. I'm so excited to chat with you today about the science of reading and some EdTech connections. But before we jump in, can you share a bit about your role in education? What does your day-to-day look like?
Sure. So thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here. It's so great to connect with you. My name is Linda Rhyne. I am an independent educational consultant, which means I get to dabble in a lot of things, and it means I get to live out my passion about literacy instruction. And my day-to-day, really, I work with schools and districts with a focus on literacy instruction, also instructional coaching. I just find that those two things pair really well. And typically, I'm serving as a thought partner, a coach, or a teacher in some cases, if we're doing some sort of training, working with educators and school and district leaders in that work. And I'm also the founding president of the Reading League North Carolina, which is a chapter of the National Reading League organization. And our mission is really to focus on spreading the awareness, use, and understanding of evidence-aligned reading instruction, which is really, quote unquote, science of reading.
Yeah. And, that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to chat today. I came across your article on ASCD's blog. As an ASCD author, I'm always poking around on there to see what people are sharing, and loved your blog post. And so today we're talking about the science of reading and connections to education technology. But to start us off, can you explain what the science of reading refers to and why it's so important for all K-12 educators to understand?
Sure. So first, I'll lean on the Reading League, which actually put out a publication that they called the Defining Guide, and they recognized the need for developing a common definition of the science of reading, because it really is, we require a shared language when we're talking about that, right? And so to quote the Defining Guide, they say the science of reading is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based, and that's in italics, research about reading and issues related to reading and writing, right? And that scientifically part is important because it points us to research where you can lean on the results in a much more reliable fashion. And it's important. This kind of work is, and this shift that we're seeing is really important. And you'll hear a lot of stories from folks that for too long we've really ignored what the research has pointed to as the proper instruction to be happening in order for us to develop proficient readers. And it's, as an educator, it can be hard to stomach that we have known, and that some people have known and not everybody has. And, for many folks who were teaching younger children how to become readers, myself included, we were leaning on practices that didn't necessarily have the evidence base behind them. And so we were teaching children to memorize words or lean on pictures, and also, not necessarily working in strong approaches to comprehension for students. And so we know that literacy has such a profound impact on life outcomes, right? Like it impacts everything. And it's just so important that we get it right for kids and adults who are maybe facing illiteracy right now. And in fact, when you really look back at history, access to literacy has been used as a tool of oppression, right? Like we have kept people from accessing literacy purposefully when we are trying to oppress a particular population of people. And so knowing that, and knowing that we have access to this research, means that we need to know better and do better.
And I love that and really appreciate that historical connection of the impact, right, of this work, and why it is so important to lean into the evidence, embrace the evidence. And I guess that gets, and you've alluded a bit to what I wanted to ask you just around this shift, right? Why are so many schools and districts right now embracing the science of reading? And, I'll extend that even to ask about in cross-curricular environments. We all know, right, as practicing, I could say for my practicing classroom teacher, right, of why it's important to thread this out, thread this throughout the day. But why now are we seeing so many schools and districts embrace the science of reading?
Well, the hashtag is trendy, certainly right now. I know I'm following it on my own social media platforms so that I can stay informed. But honestly, I think one of the catalysts has been some of the reporting that's happened with APM reports and Emily Hanford's work with her award-winning podcast. Natalie Wexler is in the mix. And so you have these folks who are helping to uncover some of what's been happening in education and giving people who are not entrenched in education access to that, right? And so you also then have educators and policymakers and parents paying attention to what we can do to get it right. And so you're seeing sweeping legislation happen. And so you've got people paying attention. And so it feels trendy, but it's not, right? Like the research has been around for decades. And for some people who have been living and breathing that work, they are kind of scratching their heads like, how is this what it is right now? Like, why is this a movement? I've been doing this all along, right? And so you have people, many people get into education because we care about kids and we want to get it right by kids, right? So I think that's why you're seeing people start to pay attention to, wait, there is a science of reading? Wait, I've been doing it wrong. Wait, I've been guiding people to do it wrong this whole time. So just when you realize that, right, it's like, oh my gosh, like what didn't I know? And I'm seeing passionate educators who are spending their additional personal hours learning about this, figuring it out and making sense of it. And from a cross-curricular standpoint, since we know that literacy helps us function in every discipline, it makes sense that whether you are actually teaching literacy or not, that you are also considering what is your impact on a student's literacy.
Mm-hmm.
And especially for our older readers who may not have had access to a teacher who had that foundational skill knowledge and haven't been equipped with some of the decoding skills and foundational skills that we might have needed, we need all hands on deck. We need folks at all levels in all content areas figuring out how do they help children access what it is that they're trying to teach through text.
And just those cross-curricular connections too, for someone who might be listening in today without, say, a formal ELA hat on, right, or reading hat on, right? They know that this impacts all of the things that students do, whether it is reading an informational piece of text in a social studies or science classroom, or breaking down a process in a math classroom, or even unpacking, right, information that might connect back to a computer science skill, right, standard that they're working for. So, so many schools are embracing this or thinking about what it looks like from a cross-curricular implementation. So I'd love to hear about some ways that technology can support this work. From a teacher perspective, someone who's in a classroom right now with a group of students, how can they leverage ed tech in their roles for planning this type of work?
So there's going to be a lot of engagement opportunities, and I think we're going to see a lot of ed tech related opportunities begin to expand too, as companies recognize the need for support in this space. One curriculum that has already started having tech support for that work is UFly, where they have a lot of online and digital type ways to interact with students to still carry out, right, a teacher-led lesson. So it's not necessarily that students are diving into these games and it's without the teacher kind of leading what's happening. Instead, it's a tool for the teacher to use where it's getting them into an interactive blending board. It's getting them to interact with working with the sounds or hearing sounds, right? Especially for teachers that might not have the same dialect as the students that they're teaching, right? It gives them an opportunity to pronounce the phonemes correctly with their class by leaning on a digital recording that's doing it correctly. Which is that's a really new piece of learning for a lot of teachers, right? Like we weren't necessarily trained in some of those speech language things. Yeah. And so you have access to that. I also think that there's some new apps coming out that teachers can engage with or have access to in their classrooms where students can have some additional practice as well. And of course, there's digital texts everywhere, right? And so I think you find that there's a lot of teachers leaning on some of that digital text support. And I did make myself the note to mention here that there is a difference in how we read printed text and digital text. So that is something that for your listeners, when they're thinking about an ed tech world, it feels really easy and accessible, right? In education where we don't have any money. It feels like to purchase things as a teacher, right? To lean on a digital text and to have students only interacting on a screen. But there's this caveat. A recent study found that digital reading for leisure purposes does not necessarily pay off in terms of reading comprehension. We don't see those gains in reading comprehension as much as in traditional print reading. I mean, you think about that in terms of our world, that makes sense, right? Like when we're reading something digitally, our brain is not shutting off as much. We have trained our brains that when we're interacting with something digitally, that we're ready to also pay attention to external stimulus. And so we want to be keeping that in mind and putting, giving students varied opportunities to engage with texts, both digitally and in print when we can. And I have some links to resources that we can put in the show notes to support that, including the study abstract. So yeah, I think do it, but be a critical consumer too, and ask yourself, like, with what purpose am I leaning on this digital tool, and how does it support engagement with students, but also still help me meet the goal of what my instruction is?
Yeah. Yeah. And just even as you were describing the interactions that students have with different types of text, right? The print text, the digital text. I don't know if you feel this way, but sometimes if someone recommends a book to me or I stumble across a book, I say, I want this in paperback, or I want this. This is fine for me to have right on a Kindle, or this is going to be one I listen to in an audiobook. Like, I don't always make the right judgment call, but I'm usually making some sort of judgment beforehand on what I'm going to need to really like have physically in my hand in order to make the most of it. And just like for students, we want to give them options and prepare them for all of these ways, right, that they interact with text. And, it's really interesting too to think about just the sounds right within language and some of the resources you mentioned, because I would imagine for someone who's been teaching literacy a certain way for a few years, maybe not leaning into right the phonemic awareness component, right, or some of the other pieces that are ingrained in the science of reading, right, having that extra support to be able to let students hear something pronounced a particular way, right, is going to be really helpful for them if they haven't had that professional practice, or maybe they're even just coming out of a teacher ed program right now where this was not an emphasis the past, few years or the past decade. And, as we think about, some of the ways that technology can help from a teacher perspective, right? That planning, that preparation, are there ways that tech can help with engaging reluctant readers or supporting students who might just need different resources than their peers?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind when I think about the digital opportunities and the supports that we have through tech is accessibility.
Mhm.
For our students, you have things like screen readers and, so making sure that students, if they need it, that they have access and they know how to use that tool to help them with when they're engaging with a digital text. But also, you've got opportunities for students to engage with a text like an Audible or some kind of
Mhm.
audiobook, as well as having access to that while they have the printed text in front of them, or they're tracking the digital text as it highlights the words as it's being read to them. And especially for our students who have gaps in their foundational skills and find that it is difficult for them to decode a text proficiently, that can be a huge bonus because now they have access to reading. The decoding is not the gatekeeper for them, but instead it is, they can engage with the comprehension, they can engage with the class, right? So we were talking about those cross-curricular opportunities. If I'm in upper grades, high school, and I'm thinking about how I'm supporting students, my takeaway, I want students to access the science content, right? But if they can't read the text, how am I
Right.
giving them access to that content? And using an EdTech tool that allows them to listen to the text might be the answer. So lots of opportunities for decoding and vocabulary support there, as well as just wider access to
Yeah.
more texts because of having access to them digitally at a
So
lower
yeah.
cost.
And just those multiple entry points for students, not only getting that right text in their hand in different ways, but really helping them make the most of it, right? And I love those examples that you shared too. So as we're talking about the tech connection to the science of reading, I can't help but ask a bit about a hot topic in all parts, right, of education and beyond. I'm sure just like myself, you're having conversations outside of education spaces about AI. So, what are your thoughts about the role of AI here? Can artificial intelligence play a role in supporting the science of reading and initiatives that a school might be thinking about in ways that teachers might generate resources? Would love to hear your thoughts on the AI connection.
Yeah. So I'm in the camp of yes, but
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just think it's important to be responsible with how we're leaning on a tool that is still new and people are still figuring out, but I do think that there are tech tools. There's one in particular called Project Read.ai.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an opportunity to generate decodable texts for students,
Mm-hmm.
specific for your students in your class, right? So I think that is an amazing opportunity to really think about how does AI help us be responsive to the students right in front of us. Maybe as a teacher, you need to generate an additional text at a different readability level, right? around a certain content area that you're reading so that you can develop a text set for students, AI might be able to help you do that. And if with the right prompts that you enter in there, I certainly think there are opportunities to do that. I love the idea that you can say, like, write it in this to make it sound like Moira, right? From Schitt's Creek. And what an opportunity to teach students about writer's voice.
Yeah.
Right? Like how that can help you kind of have different examples. And so I think it certainly helps teachers have the opportunity to be more creative about how they're developing resources specific to their classroom and their needs.
Yeah. And I appreciate too, just what you said about that. I've been using the term like healthy hesitation, like get excited, right? With that deep breath. And you can hold all these feelings at the same time. You don't have to just pick one.
Yes.
So I think that, and I like those examples too about the voice and just differentiating text or making things more interesting or relevant or just accessible, for students. So Linda, this was so helpful for unpacking what the science of reading is, what it can look like in classrooms, how technology can support the work that educators are doing. And we'll link out to some of the resources you mentioned, to your contact info. But for anyone who's listening and like on the move and needs to make a mental bookmark, where can they connect with you? Where can listeners learn more about your work?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I'll share with you. I'm on all the social media platforms for the most part. Listen, I can't be on all of them, but come find me. My company's name is Linda Rhyne Consulting. That's the best way to connect with me in terms of my work. And that is my website too, Linda Rhyne Consulting, and everything is linked there. So you can access resources there. You can email me through there. My goal this year is to host monthly events, free like workshops around some of the resources that I've developed. And so, be on the lookout if you want to connect with me live and you can join one of those. I'm always sharing the link to sign up for those in my social media platforms.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Linda, for your time today and sharing all of this actionable information with listeners.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
It was great chatting with Linda today. Let's finish up this episode with a few key points to make this EdTech easy. Review the science of reading definition. Make cross-curricular connections to reading instruction. Incorporate print and digital text. Leverage technology, even AI, to support accessibility and differentiation. Remember, you can find all the resources from today's episode, including the best way to connect with Linda, by heading to classtechtips.com/podcast and finding today's episode. You'll also find plenty of links in the summary or description of wherever you're listening to this. So if you've got a podcast app open, you should be able to see all of those resources right there for you underneath the podcast player for today's episode. This episode is sponsored by my new mini course, Learn ChatGPT This Summer, which is now available to all members of my AI and Education membership. Join today and stay for 1 month, the whole school year, or however long you like. You'll get instant access to my mini course, Learn ChatGPT This Summer, with 6 short videos. It's built into my AI and Education membership, so you'll get all the member perks too, like a new video update each month and plenty more to explore. Go to my website, classtechtips.com/AI, to find the link to the membership. That's classtechtips.com/AI for all of the details. This March, we'll celebrate 5 years of the Easy EdTech podcast. To help celebrate, I'm hoping you can do us a favor. Leave a rating or review for the podcast wherever you're listening today. Spotify will let you tap on the stars, and Apple Podcasts will let you tap on the stars too and leave a 1 or 2 sentence review. A big thank you in advance for helping us get ready to celebrate this March.